I would like to start first session of our conference, which is in fact a keynote lecture by a distinguished professor and guest, Pierre-Michel Menger. Pierre-Michel Menger was born in east part of France, and after obtaining first education in Forbach and Strasbourg, he moved to Paris, where he obtained the best possible education at distinguished schools like École Normale Supérieure or HESS. After his graduation, he joined CEFRES and also taught at his at schools, different schools like Sciences Po, for example. Since 2013, Pierre-Michel Menger is a professor at Collège de France, which is probably the highest possible post reachable in a French academic system. He is publishing very much. His topic is sociology of labor, sociology of talent. Has many publications, both published in French in France or published in English in Anglo-Saxon countries. I would like to, I'm looking forward to a presentation which is labeled Scientific Research, Matter of Resources, Performance, Competition and Collaboration. So, Professor Menger, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear colleagues, and hi everybody, good morning. First of all, I want to thank the director of CEFRES, Jérôme Heurtaud, for his invitation to participate in the celebration of this 30 years of CEFRES. And sorry, I regret, of course, to be far away. Since coming back to Prague and meeting colleagues and students, there is always wonderful. As you mentioned, dear colleague, I hold the chair of Sociology of Creative Work at the Collège de France. Among my research topics is work and careers in science and higher education, and that's the core of my presentation tomorrow. This morning. So, studying research has been long of interest to researchers themselves, historians, philosophers, sociologists, economists, psychologists, who in various capacities want to analyze scientific organization, research personnel and careers, the level and efficiency of public and private R&D expenditures, the contribution of research to innovation, the mechanisms of scientific competition at all levels, local, national, global, variations in individual and collective performance, especially in various disciplines, and even the sources of scientific creativity. That's the ultimate secret. Two basic mechanisms allow us to understand how research acts. The first is exploratory production of knowledge of uncertain value. The second is highly selective use of exploitation of knowledge published and deemed fruitful. On the exploratory side, the rule is that of unlimited horizontal differentiation in activities shaped by the ambition of discovery and innovation. It leads to specialization through fragmentation of fields and disciplines into subsets. It also leads to permanent recombination of available knowledge and to disciplinary or subdisciplinary recombinations. This vector of differentiation allows for individual commitment to activities in which success is uncertain, since the development of niches of specialization give scientific production the character of a functionally imperfect competition. The work of each and every scientist and team has a coefficient of singularity as well as a gradient of comparability. On the other side, that of selective use of one another work, we see vertical differentiation operating in research. This is the vector of competition between individuals, teams, organizations, and countries. It introduces multiple dimensions of inequality in the accomplishment and success of research undertakings. Science is indeed one of the most inegalitarian, high-skilled activities, although the currency of success is first of all reputational and symbolic before being convertible into inequalities in job and monetary rewards. Horizontal differentiation encourages the increase in the number of researchers, the multiplication of publications, journals, and various means of diffusion, especially now, and the unlimited variety of knowledge produced. Vertical differentiation operates the other way around, through competition by selection. It allocates to a minority of scientists, teams, and organizations the benefits of success based on the value given mainly by citation to knowledge singled out by peers. As a result, productivity and inventiveness of researchers are very unevenly distributed in the course of selective differentiation. These facts have been studied since the invention of a so-called Science of Science research program in the late 1950s. A technology for quantifying research output and collaborations has been added to the usual process of evaluating the quality of scientific work by peers involved in decisions about selecting publications, financing projects, deciding on recruitment and promotion, attracting colleagues from elsewhere, and granting awards. By assessing quality and originality, but this assessment of quality and originality is a difficult and imperfect process. Irresistibly, measurement of scientific productivity and the use of various indicators have become instrumental in the management of hirings and promotions, in the structuring of collaborations, in the certification of teams and organizations, in the allocation of resources, in the ranking of journals, universities, and countries. Science of Science is therefore inseparably first a field of exploration in the hands of researchers who want to understand how their own work and that of their competitors is organized in order for them to increase their productivity and their audience by identifying useful knowledge as well as productive teams with whom to work. And secondly, it is an instrumental resource strategically used by all stakeholders in the production of science at every level of decision and resource allocation. Knowledge about knowledge production can then simultaneously become a resource in the competition and an instrument to amplify unequal opportunities to produce valuable knowledge. So now let me show the roadmap of my presentation after this brief introduction. In my presentation, I will first provide a set of facts and figures about the production of research, disciplinary contrasts, and the patterns of inequalities between countries. Next, I will discuss inequalities in individual research performance and the hunting for the 1% elite researchers. Then I will move from individuals to teams, since research is increasingly a matter of collaboration. Yet collaborations are governed by certain mechanisms like selective matchings that contribute to performance gaps. Finally, I will briefly examine competition in the academic training of researchers before concluding on the links between the two major inequalities in science as in the economy in general, that within countries and that between countries. And I will finally ask, how can Europe do better, at least in science? Research production in a global world. Science is made out of inventions, of ideas and hypotheses, experiments, observations, published results available to all academics and stakeholders. And the production of papers and books is itself an ideal candidate for the scientific analysis of science. This is the business of what we call scientometrics. Here are some trends in the evolution of research production. The first figure in the upper part of this slide is taken from an excellent paper published in Science 3 years ago and written by 14 co-authors, all of whom are top contributors to the advancement of the science of science I was talking about. In the panel on the left, you see the exponential growth in the volume of scientific literature over the 20th century. But as the authors of this article state, it would be naive to equate the growth of scientific literature with the growth of scientific ideas. Changes in the publishing world, both technological and economic, have led to increasing efficiency in the production of publications. Moreover, new publications in science tend to cluster in discrete areas of knowledge. And on the panel B, on the upper right side, the panel B shows the result of a large-scale text analysis. The authors have used phrases extracted from titles and abstract of the papers in order to measure the cognitive extent of the scientific literature. In doing so, they have found that the conceptual territory of science expands linearly with time. In other words, whereas the number of publications shown on the left side grows exponentially, the space of ideas expands only linearly. That said, one of the factors contributing to the growth of publications is the multiplication of scientific journals, both for reasons of the increasing specialization of disciplines and subdisciplines, the pressure exerted by the growing number of researchers seeking outlets for their work, and the competition between publishers. We can control for this factor that contributes to the growth in the number of articles. This is the graph in the lower left-hand corner of the slide, with the upper curve representing the evolution of the world production of articles, and the dotted curve representing this evolution if we keep the number of journals constant. The output growth varies by discipline. In the figure at the bottom right, you can see the share of the different disciplines that are presented in the world production of articles. Each column represents the situation in the average for 2012-2016. The red dot shows the share of each science 12 years before, and the orange triangle refers to the situation in 2016. On a global scale, prevalence in the production of science goes to life science, medical research and basic biology, then chemistry, engineering, and physics. Together, those fields account for about 2/3 of total publications. How do countries rank in the world production of science? In the top figure of this slide, you can see the ranking of the 20 leading countries: US research, generates 1/5 of total publications in 2016, but its share was 30% in the early 2000s. China, which was at 4% in 2000, is now at 18%. Then come UK, Germany, Japan, India, and France. And competition about nations is tougher. A growing number of countries have now developed their own research system. The number has doubled since 1970. In the bottom figure, you see the growth rate of publications in China and in the US. In total, and by fixing the number of journals for comparison, starting from an index set at 1 for 2005. This is an illustration of how China is catching up. China is in red, of course, is catching up with its scientific and geopolitical rival, the US. Remember that 30 years ago, China started sending its best PhD students by tens of thousands to train in the US. Now, China trains its own PhD students and brings back its best scientists by reverse brain drain with its thousands talent and subsequently 10,000 talents program. Science is, as I mentioned in my introduction, a matter of inequality too. Up to now, I have documented competition in science between countries. Now, let's go down to the level below and give a look at inter-individual competition between individual researchers. What will surface is the extreme inequality in individual research performance and visibility. The highly skewed distribution of individual production, that is, publication of articles mainly, was first observed by Alfred Lotka a century ago, and Lotka's law was confirmed by countless quantitative studies. As shown by Canadian researchers, I quote here, Larivière, Chambaud, Macaluso, and Jengra in a very good paper published in 2010 having to do with the Canadian system of science. The skewed distribution of publications is not the only point. It also concerns the funding of research. As shown in the top figure on the slide here, distributions reveal a Pareto concentration of publications, citations, and of research grants. About 1/5 of academic scientists produce 4/5 of all publications, and 1/5 of scientists account for over 4/5 of all citations. And research funding for projects is similarly skewed. There are variations among disciplines, of course, but they only nuance the Pareto profile of wide inequality in research. With my team at the Collège de France, we built a large data set on career and production of French academics, and we found that the Pareto law similarly and unsurprisingly applies to the French case. See the two graphs at the bottom of the slide. They show the concentration in the distribution of publications in the humanities and social sciences on the left chart, and in the life and natural sciences on the right chart. I just mentioned citations of articles. Citation is our currency. It rewards researchers for the attention given to their articles and for the use made of their work. Attention and use are scarce in a way. They are highly selective, and the distribution of citations is even more skewed, as I mentioned, than that of publications. At one extreme, we will find the small number of publications and researchers that are highly cited, the top 1%, so to say. But at the other extreme, there is a considerable number of publications that are never cited. As shown in this slide, Eugene Garfield, one of the inventors of scientometrics with direct Solar Prize, who wrote a famous book like titled Little Science, Big Science. Eugene Garfield calculated that half of the 38 million of articles published between 1900 and 2005 have been not cited at all, half of them. 60% of those cited at least once are cited less than 10 times, and only 0.5 are cited more than 200 times. This is a matter of pride and humility in science, I have to say. One possible objection to this calculation is well known. In the humanities and social sciences, there is a much greater emphasis on books than in the other sciences. Another objection concerns the databases used in scientometrics, which focus mainly on English language journals. With my research team, we built the largest possible database by including all the French journals and all the books catalogued by the French National Library. This was a huge undertaking, I have to say. The counting refers to the publications, articles, and books issued by all the academics active in French universities between 1985 and 2015. We stopped the calculation at 2010 to avoid the right censoring in publication data. As a result, as you can see here, about a fifth to a quarter of academics have published neither books nor article in the humanities, with the percentage of non-publishers being lower in the sciences over time. So a short takeaway at this point. Research is a risky game. Many are attracted, but inequalities in production are very high. And competition for attracting attention on one's work and getting it used by other scientists is even stronger. In other words, research is an activity of highly uncertain value when observed at the individual level, but less uncertain when observed at the collective level. That is, at the level where the best researchers are next to somewhat less productive and renowned researchers. One consequence of these inequalities is that the work of the best researchers has a value that is considerably greater than what makes them different from researchers lower in the hierarchy. The competition between increasing numbers of researchers, publications, and journals acts to magnify individual differences and to focus attention and use on a minority whose work is further increased in value. This is what we will see now. Let's now look at the Pareto Curve at its base, encircled in red in the upper left figure, where 1% of the publications receive a most disproportionate number of citations. It turns out that this skewness has increased in time, as shown in the figure on the bottom right. This graph shows that the top 1% of the most cited papers in 5 leading journals in terms of impact factors are increasingly cited. One potential explanation of this shift of attention towards the top 1% is given by the authors of the paper. I quote, "Although the number of research papers has exploded, the time scientists devote to reading them has not. Researchers increasingly rely on crowdsourcing to discover relevant work, a process that favors the leading papers at the expense of the remaining 99%. So the value of the top 1% is increasing. But which countries produce more of these elite publications and producers? The two figures on the left side of this slide show the evolving share of the top 20 largest national producers in science in the top 1% on the upper part and the top 10% on the lower part of the most cited publications. This confirms China's rapid progress upward to the top. The US share, although slightly shrinking, remains the largest. In 2010-14, scientists in the US produced 36% of the top 1%, 31% of the top 10%, and as I mentioned earlier, 20% of all publications. The figure on the right side tells you the story in another way, using an index of excellence. If a country's global share of top articles is the same as its global share of all publication output, the index is 1.0. The US index was 1.9 in 2016, meaning that its share of the top 1% of cited articles was about twice the size of its share of total science and engineering articles published. Between 2000 and 2016, the European index of highly cited articles grew from 1.0 to 1.3, while China's index more than doubled from 0.4 to 1.1. So research is also a matter of teamwork. Scientific workings are not only a matter of competition, but are made out of collaboration, or better said, collaboration embedded in competition. An illustration of that is provided by the list of the authors who have published an impressive paper on science, already mentioned, and the patterns of collaboration in science. The number of co-authors and the list of affiliations here mentioned on this slide illustrate exactly what the paper demonstrates. Collaboration matters, the number of authors matters, and the diversity of research centers and of disciplines, at least for this kind of study, matters as well. From an increasing number of studies, we have learned, and here I quote the historian of science, Yves Gingras, the Canadian historian of science, Yves Gingras, scientific research has never been a strictly individual enterprise. In chemistry, for example, 1/3 of published papers had more than one author in 1900. A proportion that had grown to 70% by the end of World War II. And in contemporary science, hyper-authorship is rife. And it's rare for a single scientist to be responsible for a major theoretical breakthrough. In the post-World War era, big science and the large amounts of money required for research have fostered an environment that encourages research collaboration. Most research leading to Nobel Prizes is also the result of collaboration. despite the anachronistic fact that Nobel Prizes cannot be attributed to more than 3 individuals. End of the quotation. Here is some evidence of the growing impact of collaboration in the production of science. The figure on the left side shows that the proportion of papers written collaboratively is now the rule in the natural and medical sciences. And social sciences, the curve in the middle part of the slide, of the chart, are increasingly collaborative too. By striking contrast, research and publication in the arts and the humanities remain mostly solitary. Collaboration also means an increase in the size of the teams, as shown in the figure on the right, with the natural sciences having the largest teams due to their use of large research facilities and expensive and complex experiments. This is what we call big science. Collaborations are also increasingly international. Science has been international for centuries in terms of exchanges and circulation of knowledge and mobility of research personnel. This figure shows the annual number of articles referenced in the Web of Science database and produced between 2005 and 2017 in the world. In solid lines are articles produced in collaboration, the top curve, or without collaboration, the bottom curve. The subset of co-publication is then divided in national collaboration, top dashed curve, and in international collaboration, bottom dashed curve. As you see, 35 of all publications are made in international collaboration in 2015, compared to 31% in 2005. Science is still mostly national and collaborative, yet collaboration is a powerful lever of internationalization. The contribution of the various sciences to international collaboration is shown in the figure at the top left of this slide. Sciences using large facilities like astronomy lead the way in international collaboration. Astronomy, geosciences, biological sciences, and even now mathematics. Which country leads the game of international collaboration? As shown in the figure on the top right, we have two models. Countries with a high degree of openness, supply and demand for collaboration, that are the three countries on the left side, United Kingdom, France, and Germany, and countries with a low degree of openness, Japan, China, India, among the most productive countries in science. The US in the middle stands in between due to its own scientific power and to the fact that lots of foreign scientific talents are drained and work in the US. The brain drain and open competition on the scientific and academic job market, of course, adds a different dimension to internationalization. We can also analyze the composition of these international collaboration relationships, as shown in the figure at the bottom right, but I have no time to comment more on this figure, which is rich in information, but presentation is recorded can go back to it, and I can go back to this slide if we have to discuss it later after my presentation. What do this collaboration produce? More knowledge, more original and new ideas? There are several ways to measure the impact of collaborative work. The most recent and sophisticated one, which I will not present today, looks at whether the small teams produce more disruptive science, breakthrough innovation, while larger teams mostly contribute to incremental knowledge development. I'll simply show now, based on the Science of Science article already cited, that collaborative work has a greater impact that the more researchers there are in a team. In this chart and in this slide and in the three charts of this figure, one per large scientific area in terms of discipline, the red dash curve represents the mean number of coders over the last century of scientific production. And the black curves consider just those papers receiving more citations than the average in the field. The fact that the black curves are systematically above the dashed red ones means that high impact work is more likely to be produced by large teams than by small ones. Up to now, I have talked about research output in individual inequalities and productivity and reputation, and the rise of collaborative research. The question I'll address now is whether collaboration makes science less unequal or whether it merely consolidates the unequal nature of research performance. As I have just shown, some of the most significant productivity gains in science stem from the team organization of work in research. Yet research in science of science also shows that these productivity gains come from the networked design of those teams. That design follows the rule of what we call associative matching. Indeed, in the associative or selective matching design, researchers greatly benefit from associating with peers of at least equal ability. Note that the same is true for students. The unique characteristic of associative matching is that it provides well-matched individuals with higher returns on their respective abilities than they would otherwise obtain through random collaboration. This form of association, in other words, has a multiplicative effect. This is especially the case when work is organized on a project-by-project basis, as it is common in research. And here's how it works. This slide and the next two are based on a much-cited pioneering paper by Jones, Vushti, and Yuzi. The authors find the following. First, the growth of collaborative scientific work observed between 1975 and 2005 is mainly related to collaboration between universities, the green curve, rather than to collaboration within a university, the yellow curve, especially in science and engineering, and progressively too in the social sciences. Secondly, who collaborates with whom? In collaborations between researchers belonging to different universities, the trend is clear. If we divide the universities into 4 tiers, from the most research intensive to the least one, we see that pairings are made between researchers in the same tier. Those pairings are more likely than if collaborative matching occurred randomly. Thirdly, what does that stratification of collaborations provide? As shown in the figure here, which condenses a lot of calculation. Go read the article, in fact, it is amazing. There is obviously an advantage in terms of citation impact. The publication of the researchers who collaborate in the university of the first tier have the strongest gains in impact. The mechanism of selective matchings, which is now kind of common knowledge, in fact, in science amounts to an endogenous production of inequalities in scientific production. This leads us to ask how inequalities in outcome relate to inequalities in input, that is, resources, high quality personnel and students. And here a process of self-reinforcing or cumulative advantage comes into play. This mechanism starts operating with the training of PhDs and the production and placement of faculty. We all know that the faculty job market plays a fundamental role in shaping research priorities, educational outcomes, and career trajectories among scientists and institutions. As shown in a 2015 research on 3 disciplines, computer science, business, history, in the US, faculty, I quote, faculty production, that is the number of faculty placed among all the PhD holders in the job market, is highly skewed, with only 25% of institutions producing 71% to 86% of all tenure track faculty, end of the quote. Furthermore, doctoral prestige alone better predicts ultimate faculty placement than the usual university rankings. A self-reinforcing process is the driving force. Increased institutional prestige leads to increased faculty production, better faculty placement, and a more influential position within the discipline. Prestige goes along with resources, and inequality in prestige with inequality in resources drawn from endowment, donations by alumni, higher tuition fees, and more research funding allocated by public agencies through project-based competitive grants. This is increasingly so, as shown in the right chart. Of course, this concerns US, but more and more other countries. As noted by the author of the paper I'm taking the right chart from, the Princeton sociologist Hugh C. Scientists affiliated with prestigious institutions are more productive and better rewarded than those who are not. Hence, greater institution level inequality serves to intensify the individual level inequality of scientists. This is a process of embeddedness, in fact. In the US, institution level inequality in resources has increased over time. Institutional inequalities are shown in this chart by using the Gini coefficient, which ranges from 0 for absolute equality to 1 for absolute inequality. Despite already high levels of inequality in the 3 resource measures, the Gini coefficients trended upward during that period, 1990 to 2010. The training of scientists and the production of PhDs is done in universities. Global competition alters, as we know and experience now, the architectures of university. The principles underpinning the evaluation of academic work and workers, the monetary and non-monetary incentive tools, and the design of job and task allocation. With increasing mobility of faculty and students, and with a whole industry of rankings, performance auditing, and the implementation of excellence frameworks in Germany, in UK, in France, and elsewhere, a growing value has been given to research, which is the most openly competitive academic task. As a result, the reputation of a university's research has a far greater signaling value than the quality of its teaching mission. And research enjoys productivity gains that are inaccessible to teaching with its fairly constant productivity. At least up to now. We'll see if digital means and technologies will change the game. How is the functional link between teaching and research in academic work still to be understood in a context of heightened competition between and within universities? In the abundant literature that has studied link between the quality of teaching and research performance in higher education, three views surface: positive complementarity, negative complementarity between teaching and research, or nil correlation. As to positive complementarity, arguments are easy to find. The first is one of conditional necessity. Without research, no teaching would be possible. One provides the content of the other, for knowledge evolves constantly, and it would be unthinkable to teach students obsolete routine knowledge that is too distant from the cutting edge of research. The positive complementary view is notably endorsed by those faculty who denounce the shortcomings of extreme individualized performance evaluation. Indeed, the positive complementarity view looks egalitarian in a sense. We are also quite aware of negative complementarity and or substitution effects. Beyond a given level of teaching load, the marginal value of the time left for research diminishes dramatically. Personal trade-offs are especially strategic in presence of asymmetrical valuation of performance in teaching and research. We are then confronted with the well-known issue of multitasking. But if positive as well as negative complementarity sound correct, they tend to cancel one another out. In that case, we would observe a zero relationship between teaching quality and research performance. This nil correlation is precisely what a recent study published this year has found. Regardless, I quote the authors, regardless of the measure of effective teaching or exemplary scholarship, top teachers are no more or less likely to be especially productive scholars than their less accomplished teaching peers. This is encouraging for those who fear that great teachers specialize in pedagogy at the expense of research. On the other hand, it is disappointing to observe that weak undergraduate teachers do not make up for their limitations in the classroom with disproportionate research excellence. End of the quote. The explanation for this zero correlation is to be found in the respective performance profiles of teaching and research. You are now familiar with inequality in research with their Pareto profiles on the left panel. Distribution of teaching performance is quite different. It is Gaussian. The graph on the right panel is based on the distribution of the evaluations given by students and of the quality of their teachers and their courses. You see that mainly teachers know how to teaching in a good way. There are bad teachers, there are excellent teachers, but the majority is in the right middle. As I have already indicated, reputation and prestige come from research, the value of which can be known throughout the whole scientific system, whereas the value of teaching concerns only the institution that provides it and its students. Where research and teaching are most complementary, in fact, is at the graduate level. The effectiveness of teaching and of research become strongly correlated as students get closer to PhD studies and their work gets similar to that of a junior academic researcher. What is now really impressive is to see how the share of PhD students over undergraduate students is a widely used indicator of research intensity. For those universities getting more international, the rules of the reputational competition, selectivity, internationalization, research intensity, country attractiveness apply not only to hire or poach high-profile faculty, but also to match them with PhD students queuing to get admitted to highly selective admission processes. In a quite convincing study on European countries and the attractiveness of their higher education system, Sieber and his co-authors have developed a composite indicator of attractiveness. Correlation of this indicator of attractiveness with the share of foreign academics, see the left panel, and with the share of foreign PhD students, see the right panel, is very high, as the slopes of the curve show. You will notice that Switzerland at the top here and here, Switzerland is at the top of both curves. In fact, Switzerland is a highly predatory country on the international market for academic talent, both for faculty and PhD and postgraduate talents. The same, in fact, is true under different conditions in a country like Israel. Very, very active in science and innovation, despite its small size, but devoting larger resources to research and development than many other countries in Europe. Israel is associated to the European Union like Switzerland. This is why I mentioned these two countries. Now, let me conclude. As I have shown, production of knowledge is among the most globalized human activities. But does this globalization increase collaboration, or does it strengthen competition and inequality between the actors of science, between their institutions and between their countries? We are witnessing a familiar process that is seen also in the economy in general, the trade-off between within countries inequalities and between countries inequalities. Globalization of science and the increased use of internet technology have conflicting effects on inequality in science. At the level of individual scientists and institution, so that's the within country component, they have tended to intensify inequality. At the between countries level, they have narrowed it, just as between country income inequality has narrowed in the world, notably because of a rise of income in China. Between country differences in science have also narrowed thanks to the so-called globalization of science. Therefore, we can state on the one hand that the most significant consequences of these two forces for science have been positive overall. The large expansion of science as a collective enterprise and the resulting rapid progress of science on a global scale. And we see, on the other hand, that scientific competition between countries has intensified to maintain or obtain leadership with its influence on innovation and economic growth. Is there an alternative model to the hierarchy of universities based on the research intensity and the global competition it generates? Are there different models for producing the best possible science? In a recent address at the annual conference of the Oxford Centre for Global Higher Education, its director, Simon Marginson, highlighted the transformations introduced by the accelerated globalization of science and higher education. His diagnosis is essentially critical and calls for more egalitarian global world in science. On the one hand, I quote, "The global science system is sustained by bottom-up collegial cooperation between scientists operating outside their nation states and generating global common goods that are crucial to us, as the pandemic has shown." End of the quote. After the birth of internet in 1990, higher education has seen a phenomenal growth of faculty and student mobility, cross-border programs and institutions, partnerships and consortia between institutions, the sharing of information and spreading of good practices. On the other hand, stratification of the global higher education map is now common knowledge. Rankings proliferate, notably doctoral student mobility and faculty mobility are shaped by excellence hierarchies. In a highly critical charge against the Anglo-American model of science and academia, Marginson laments the fact that, I quote, "The globalization has emerged after 1990 in economy, culture, education, and science was not a shared space based on respect for the other and mutual learning. It was a hegemonic American-led globalization grounded in European, in brackets, Hellenic Judeo-Christian, end of bracket, heritage, end of the quote." A key issue, according to assessment like the one I just quoted, is that of inequality within and between countries. The world-class university template in rankings embodies the culture, values, lives, and economic interest, I quote Marginson again, not of everyone, but of tiny national elites in a handful of countries. Brain drain routinely decimates emerging systems, end of the quote. And Margison's hope for change would come from the fact that the world is becoming multipolar, with China rising at the top of science as well as in the world of the world economy, and India, South Korea, among other Asian and Southeastern countries, being the next strong contenders. In physical sciences, engineering, and mathematics and computing, the top universities in China and Singapore are the US level. In high citation papers, Tsinghua University has passed MIT to become world number one. It is still Anglo-American in content, but its production is dispersed. This provides, that's the dream of Marginson, more favorable conditions for global cultural plurality in the future. Under the same critical fire comes scientometrics, measurement of performance, the business of scientific publishing, imperialism of Anglo-American lingua franca, and also white male domination as promoted by the US leadership in science. This is a compendium of critical views against the dominant model of science and higher education in a supercharged version. The conclusion of Margison's diagnosis is that competition favoring the rise of new giants is about to undermine the Euro-American domination in science and academia. In other words, for a more equal world to happen, we need more competition rather than less. This sounds a somewhat unexpected conclusion, since the plea for a more equal world in science and knowledge production and diffusion usually celebrates the leveling virtue of increased collaboration and flows of exchanges, and it banishes competition. Well, are China, Singapore, or other Asian rising academic tigers really prepared to endorse a culture of equality within and between countries, whereas the race for leadership? And can Europe remain a strong player in science, able to become even stronger? The Europe of science and higher education is still a mosaic of very different national systems. The choice has been made to accelerate its building through alliances and research consortia. This option is more complex and its performance is more uncertain than in an integrated national system as in the US or China. the regulatory and administrative costs in accelerating exchanges and cooperation between European countries are significant. For sure, better funding is needed, but funding is not only one part of the story. So I will end by this conclusion, mixed conclusion, and still there is hope for betterment in our system, in our European model of construction of alliances and cooperation between countries, maybe in the future more integrative. Thank you for your attention.
I was impressed by you speaking about these collaborative publications and collaborative work, how it looks like that in different disciplines there is highly different numbers of average number of authors, but trend is overall increase.
Yeah,
I'm from the social sciences. I was director of the Institute of Sociology for 9 years, and I've been observing the same trend in Czech sociology.
yeah.
But I was a little bit suspicious about you partly explained that by the necessity and the increasing complexity of the science, that the largest teams are needed to do a science. And in sociology, what I have observed, it was sometimes very much like a utilitarian behavior, because it's a bibliometric, from a bibliometric point of view, it is better if 4 people write 8 articles altogether instead of 4 people write each of them two single author articles. So I would like your comment about that.
Yeah. Thank you for your remark and question. Of course, there is a way to game the system, and that's what you mentioned. Now that people are assessed by publication rates and research intensity, of course, there are many ways to game the system, and this is one of them. But if you look at the citation side, this is a different problem, of course. How are these multiple publications based on a kind of network and cluster of people working together? How is the impact? What is the impact of this kind of publications? I guess there is a kind of unbalanced reward, and you can get publications more and more and produce them and churn them. But at the end, if they have no impact, this is bad news. So it's always the same system. But note that this is on the side of research. I mentioned that productivity gains are only really observed up to now on the side of research. And one of them is mentioned is based on collaboration. And there are many fine-tuned collaborations. And I mentioned one system, one mechanism, but there are also kind of perverse use of the collaborations. And you mentioned one of them, but in teaching, you don't have that kind of productivity gain, at least up to now. So it's quite normal to see that the game and the gaming the system is mainly observed on the research side. But of course, at what point this is well known too, because in science, many facts are common knowledge, and people know exactly what happens when we see people coming from the same cluster, the same network of once more, etc., etc. So we know how to balance our judgment about these behaviors.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm looking for there is a raised hand, please.
Good morning. Thank you very much for your lecture. Professor, I just have a very small question. So we've had this overview of the evolutions, the quantified evolutions all over the world in the ways of producing research. I wonder what we know, I wonder what we know about how the patterns of work satisfaction of researchers have evolved with these trends. How the academic cultures in Europe and the US have kind of accompanied the different pressures for changing the patterns in which researchers have worked. Thank you.
Yeah. Work satisfaction is a tricky issue, of course. When you enter the game of science, you dream of highly expressive work, making the best out of all your capacities and bringing you on the edge of inventiveness, and that's the usual rationale for entering a highly uncertain game. And stepwise, you learn more about yourself, and you learn how to situate yourself in your field, and you adjust your hopes and your dreams, and of course. That's one part of the psychological or social psychological part of the behavior. The other part is, of course, the working conditions. And there is no surprise at it. Working conditions are better in research intensive universities than elsewhere. So the matching, selective matching component of inequality applies also to working conditions. This should not mean that people are always satisfied when they're move from one tier to another, because competition is also tougher when you move to a higher tier. This was well studied by a sociologist and maker called Joseph Hermanowitz, who wrote a book titled Scientific Lives. He compared the situation on the three tiers in physics. The first tier is where people are the best scholars and are drafted from the best universities, etc. So they know they have smart colleagues, but the challenge is high too. I can refer to my own experience. When I was hired at the Collège de France, I was, of course, happy to get that position, but I knew, and I know more and more now, that the challenge is constant. So it's always the same trick. When you play the game in the highest tier, you are challenged constantly, but you, of course, have smarter colleagues. That's interesting. In fact, if you have at the Collège de France, for example, like other major universities, you have excellent working conditions. This is really amazing. And I have to say, inequality in working conditions, that means facilities, space, etc., assistance. This is one of the major levers of inequality in performance too. And this is hard to overcome, in fact. But this is a factor I have to refer to, yeah. So at the end, I didn't mention that, but as I refer to the multiple tasking in our trade, teaching and research. So teaching is certain in terms of utility and impact, because people have to be trained, students, etc. You know that you do a good job in teaching. You transmit knowledge. As I mentioned, research is highly uncertain. So the connection between teaching, the link between teaching and research is a kind of self-insurance. If you're not that happy in research, you can, of course, move more to teaching and get more satisfaction from teaching experience. This is very obvious, and this happens very often in the course of a career, because you are certainly more productive at the beginning or the middle part of your career than at the end of your career. So Sorry for being too long in my answer.
Thank you very much for your very rich presentation. If I understand, when you said that the evolution of ideas was less evident than the evolution of number of papers, does it mean that many publications should have not been done? In another way, this demand for publication, publish or perish, that is a prescription to a lot of young scholars. It is not, how would you, what would be your advice to young researchers in terms of publish and perish, in terms of slow science? Do you think slow science, for instance, is maybe also a possibility to develop? Because if I understood well what you said, if we play the game of competition, in fact, we reproduce the inequalities more than we correct them. So what would be your advices?
So there's no way to escape the game, but the way to manage the game better. But at the beginning of a career, like for PhDs and postdoctoral students, certainly the pressure is maximal. And then you have to produce and to make your way through the maze of publications, collaboration, etc. And you learn that. And of course, it's highly selective. Some people like to play that game. Some others don't want to play that game. And collaboration maybe is one of the ways to manage that, because collaboration brings together people with different personalities, and you can build a kind of division of labor and a diversity of personalities in well-matched teams. And this is the way, I guess, you see more and more collaboration in science now. And it correlates with higher productivity and more publications. If you are alone, and of course, this is hard to stand, that's certainly true. The other remark I would make is that the game changes as your career moves on. When you are in position, you have a job, you have to select more and more carefully your projects and your publication venues, and that's what smart colleagues know also. But the last comment is that disciplines are very different from one another. And for example, in sociology, the pressure is a bit less intense than in economics. I have colleagues in economics that churn papers and papers and papers. And in sociology, I have to say, we pay attention to the components of work. Field work is long to do, is hard to do. We need to collect new data, etc., etc. So there's hard work behind, and you cannot simply churn papers one after the other, or you are known as a kind of fertile, but in a way not so interesting person. So the difference between the disciplines is a major lesson you have to take from my presentation. Collaboration intensity is very different, and publication intensity is very different from one discipline to the other. This is the way people socialize in a discipline. They know that the game is that. So after that, do we have another model to build? So as science is more and more global, it's hard to escape that model. But again, collaboration is one way to manage it. Good management of collaboration is one of the ways to do that. And finally, you have different personalities. When you assess a young scholar in order to having him hired or not, you can balance numbers of publications and quality of publications. We always have an eye on productivity and the other eye on quality. And this we know how to assess too, but it takes more time. It's not based on your age index, etc., etc. You have to go deep into the work people produce and present in order to get hired. For example, my best student was recently hired by Madison, Wisconsin, for a tenure track position, and he produced only 3 papers. But these 3 papers are really excellent and are well crafted. It took time to produce them, and this is why people knew after interviews and etc. knew that he would be maybe the right one among many other competitors to get hired. This is a good example of things are not just deterministic. Tell me how many papers it produces, tell you what are your odds of being hired. It's a bit more complicated, and this is the good news.
Just want to know how to evaluate, in a way, the China's production.
Yeah.
You mentioned there was a growing presence of Chinese journals.
You know, the multiplication of journals, of course, means that there are some good journals, new journals, some very bad journals, because the publication industry is made out of tiers. As a scholar, I constantly receive proposals for publishing in this or that journal, or becoming a reviewer or an editor, etc., etc. From journals that are mainly business-based, and this is of course bullshit. I know that, but and in China, you suddenly rising China, you can see there is a component of that, but mainly. When China develops, the Chinese scientists know that the game cannot be just changed that way. They know that they have to publish in the best journals, and that happens too. We have means to compute that with impact factor calculations, etc., etc. Can I ask one question to you, to all you? What is the situation in a country like the Czech Republic now as to this kind of international competition and the position in Europe, etc., etc.? Are there reforms in terms of stratification of the system, or reforms moving towards a more open system, or what is the situation? I'd like to know more about that. Of course, it takes time, but my learning content of work is important for me. If I can take something from this morning from you, I would be happy.
So maybe I will answer.
Yeah.
It's easy to ask and difficult to answer a question, but I will try. I think what we do have is something like sinusoid. We had some periods where maybe 10 years ago, where the government prepared a new system of science evaluation, which was extremely one-sided, bibliometric only, and they even tried to calculate use a point system. Each publication has been assigned a number of points by different weightings and calculations and whatever. And the idea was that everything will be very clear, because then you can calculate how many points the individuals and institutions aggregated, and then you have a measurement how to distribute the money, basically. And it failed because it is not the way how you can do it. And of course, there was a lot of discussions about that, because some disciplines were able to attract a lot of points, and the others were not so successful. And
Yeah.
whoever has the power to create the formulas has the power to distribute the money. It was a kind of hidden agenda behind that, politically loaded. And then it sort of collapsed, also under criticism of the international bodies which were advised to Czech governments and so on. And now we do have something like a more still very much competitive and meritocratic type of evaluation, but with a much higher involvement of peer review process and international peer review. And it's much more sound, I would say. So now we are in a kind of a post-super bibliometric phase, and now more peer review is involved in the process of, but the basic idea that the science is very competitive and the excellence should be evaluated and excellence should be identified and rewarded. It's present. Yes. It's a basic idea.
I can just add.
Yeah. Sorry, if I may add regarding Charles University, because Charles University was financing science regarding bibliometry, but because it was disadvantageous for humanities, then there was a redistribution model. But last 2 years, Charles University underwent through a very demanding and detailed process of evaluation. So there were the panels established from different sciences. We were using the most prestigious universities and the best colleagues in the disciplines from Europe, but also the United States. And this exercise was just finalized. And it was a combination of bibliometrics and also peer reviews, as Professor Kostelecki said. And the faculties and the disciplines were given evaluations, so A, B, C, D, and according to that, the finances will be distributed.
Yeah.
And also there is a very sophisticated process, because when colleagues are getting or competing for the titles, for research titles, it's habilitation or professorship. So there are certain requirements, again, which are connected also with number of publication, citations, bibliometrics, but also teaching experience. So the constant process of evaluation.
Okay, thank you. I will add a final comment, and thank you so much for this information. I have to say, the more we know, even by learning from scientometricians, as they call them themselves, the more we know from them, the more we know also that scientometrics or bibliometrics and quantification has to be handled with care. And we have to be very cautious about the instrumental use of that. And there are lots of papers mentioning that and criticizing a very rough instrumental use of bibliometrics. In the best places in the world, you never use only one information. You always build a composite indicator and assessment of excellence or of quality. And this is, of course, the right way to do science, because so thank you. I guess we overcome the time limit. So thank you.